So, good morning, everyone. Uh, Thank you for joining the webinar and a warm welcome to everyone. So, this is the third of the IncluCITY webinars, uh, and it is on making cities inclusive. My name is Shivani Gupta, and I am the Senior Inclusive Design Manager at the Global Disability Innovation Hub. I would be moderator for the webinar today. I'm joined today by my colleagues Anna-May Maldone and Sophie Glickman, who would be working behind the scenes to ensure smooth delivery of the webinar. We often rate cities based on based on the services they have to offer to the citizens. And ensuring these services are inclusive is a cornerstone of making cities inclusive. Today, I'm delighted to welcome our eminent panelists who are stalwarts in working in disability inclusion for sharing their experiences and insights on different aspects of inclusive services. Welcome to you all. If we can go to the next slide, please. So in the webinar, we will begin with a short video featuring some spotlights from the Global Disability Summit. This will be followed by a brief introduction on the topic based on a 4-year research undertaken by the Global Disability Innovation Hub, followed by our panelists giving their opening remarks. And in the end, we would have a question answer session where taking questions from the audience. So some quick housekeeping points. There is live captioning available, so please put on the button if you require it. The question answer channels are open. You can post your questions in the question answer box anytime during the webinar. And the webinar will be recorded and will be made available on YouTube. If we can go to the next slide. So today's webinar focus, as I said, this is the third in the series of 4. And this session explores how cities can make essential services like healthcare, transport, education truly inclusive. It highlights gaps in access to support and shares practical strategies to ensure services work for everyone, including for persons with disabilities. This session will be situated in our global comparison report and the global action report into the debate and how to make our services more inclusive. If we can go to the next slide. So let's begin by watching a short video with glimpses of what we heard at the Global Disability Summit. And if you can play the video, Sophie.
The Global Disability Innovation Hub recently attended the Global Disability Summit in Berlin, where we asked people about how their city shapes their daily life. Here is a snippet of what they had to say.
How does my city impact my daily life? Well, infrastructure, inclusive design, public transportation service are 3 main keys that I can identify in which the city makes life more accessible for everyone. What's the role of people with disabilities on making inclusive cities? Yeah. Of course, we have to push forward to defend our rights, to raise awareness when it comes to disability, and make people understand that inclusion is not a spending, it's not an investment, it's not an obligation, it's not something that has to be done because of a human right, but it's a commitment to guarantee and build better societies and a better world. Do I think my city is inclusive? because of the topography, Medellín cannot be 100% inclusive because it's a very hilly city. But in other fields, we are working very hard to become a more inclusive city each and every day.
And I think oftentimes it's about attitudes and the way that we respond to people who might be different from us or have different needs. Well, where we live changes who we are. We are who we are because of where we live and where we come from. And I think the way that the city changes us is evident in the way we connect with people that live in the city. So when we can connect with people from different communities and people who are experiencing life differently from us, the more we can grow as human beings and the more we can make diverse, inclusive cities work. The role of people with disabilities in creating inclusive cities is vital, because without understanding the needs of people from different communities, we simply can't plan and grow our cities in a way which is diverse and inclusive.
So I think it's really important to listen to people with disabilities and listen to what they actually need.
The future of persons with disability can be good, it can be brighter if governments, including and especially those from the Global South, will do more than ratify documents. If we can begin to implement the policies that we have developed with funding and enough resources, the life standards of people with disability will improve. And also, for the future to be bright, we need the donor world, the funding space to shift and accommodate people with disability. We need to allocate a budget for issues of people with disability so that we're not competing with those without disability for the same resources. We need to set aside and focus on issues of inclusion and persons with disabilities and strengthening the capacities of OPDs that are working to achieve the goals of inclusion. Thank you.
So those were some strong key messages that came through that I'm sure we will be deliberating further in the panel discussion today. If we can go to the next slide. So a short background on who we are. The Global Disability Innovation Hub is a research and practice center based at the University College London. And we accelerate ideas into impact for a more just world, not only for persons with disabilities, but for all people. And we are the lead for the AT2030 program funded by the UK International Development Fund that tests what works to improve access to life-changing assistive technology for all. Inclusive infrastructure is a sub-program of the AT2030 program, recognizing that users of assistive technology require an inclusive and accessible environment to use the technologies effectively. If we can go to the next slide. So through the UK International Aid-funded AT2030 program, the Global Disability Innovation Hub led a 4-year research program in 6 diverse cities, which were Nairobi, Freetown, Medellín, Solo, Ulaanbaatar, and Varanasi, spread across 3 continents. Together with local partners, we engaged with 104 people with disabilities and 92 urban stakeholders to understand the current state of infrastructure and critically analyze how it is experienced on ground by them. We use a participatory method like photo diaries, journey mapping, interviews, and co-design workshops to collect data. And we believe that inclusive design starts by listening, not just to what people have to say, but to how they move through, interact with, and feel about the spaces and services around them. The key outcomes of the research were published in the Global Comparison Report, which has been synthesized from the 6 city case studies, and a global action report that offers a plan of action and recommendation for making cities more inclusive. If we can go to the next slide. So why inclusive cities matter? we all know that urban life runs on services like health, education, transport, sanitation, justice, etc. Making physical environments accessible is only half the battle won. It is equally important to make services inclusive and responsive to the needs of persons with disability. However, according to the UN data, 75% of people with disabilities in low and middle income countries face barriers in at least one key service area. So inclusive services delivery is the tipping point between theoretical accessibility and lived participation. If we can go to the next slide. So briefly looking at the gaps identified in the research. In all the cities, people highlighted poor availability of disability-specific services, such as sign language interpreters, AT repair, or home modification services. They often encountered gaps due to limited training and high costs of these services. People encounter inaccessibility in various areas, preventing them to access service. And some of the key areas highlighted were the access to the building where the service were provided, or transportation to get to the service, especially the first and the last mile connectivity, and the inaccessibility of digital service platforms. People reported encountering attitudinal barriers and negative attitudes of staff, and the provision of specialist services that often segregated and isolated them. Quality of services recurrently came up as a barrier, and the people addressed absence or inadequate availability of inclusive service standards and patchy coverage across impairments. If we can go to the next slide. So just sharing some of the quotes of what we heard. Quoting a research participant from Nairobi, Kenya, they said that the cost of living is high, transport is high. Even sometimes you want a guide, they want to charge you. Even accessing recreational services are not accessible. Social media sites are not accessible, and entertainment as well. In Kenya, we do not have audio movies. Most of the electronic accessories are not visually impaired friendly. Most of the home appliances are not accessible, including the television. And a participant from Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia said, and I quote them, people with disabilities have a lack of accessibility to get service and information, and they need to get, they want to go. They need to get services, and if they can't go there, they should have access to get information in a way that is suitable for them. But they can't, and that needs to be improved. If we can go to the next slide. So what are some of the practical steps for city providers of cities, providers of services and partners that can be taken, that emerged from the report? One is embedding a user-centric approach, which is about co-designing what person with disabilities, with people with disabilities at all stages. The next was mandating and monitoring accessibility, applying legal standards to both physical and digital services, enforce reasonable accommodation. Next was train the human interface, This was about building disability awareness, using inclusive languages, training customer service staff, building their skills of all frontline staff and operation staff to interface with persons with disabilities. Tackle the cost barriers by offering subsidies, offering tiered pricing, tax incentives for inclusive upgrades, offering free access to assistance and service animals, then providing specialist support, such as door-to-door accessible transport, provision of AT and maintenance, home modification, and creating community care hubs, and showcasing some good practices that can inspire replication. If we can go to the next slide. All of these findings are captured in the Global Action Report on Delivering Inclusive Design in Cities. This report is a accumulation of our research and sets out 10 principles and 16 action areas that cities can use as a roadmap. The Global Action Report aims to equip cities with practical actions of practical actions to accelerate accessibility and inclusion in their physical infrastructure, building, services, and operations. It includes practical recommendations on everything from inclusive procurement and budgeting to climate adaptation and digital inclusion. And most importantly, it is designed to be adaptable.
Hello, Shivani. I think we may have lost you. Are you back now? You seem to be muted.
I think I dropped out of the call.
Okay, you're back now. I can hear you good.
Okay. So could you hear me when I was talking about this slide?
Yes, I could hear you talking about the slide and explaining about the six principles and the action areas.
Okay. So maybe we just go to the next slide. And it's my honor today to introduce the eminent panelists who are leaders and are formulating disability inclusion narratives globally, nationally, and locally. It has been I have been fortunate to have worked with some of them, and it has been a very enriching experience. First, we have Meenakshi Balasubramanian. Meenakshi is a senior associate at the Center of Inclusive Policy. Her work focuses on budget and policy analysis with a keen interest in community-based care and support services. She is a member of the Disability Rights Alliance Tamil Nadu and a core committee member of persons with disabilities at the National Human Rights Commission in India. Then we have Dagnachu Vakane. Dagnachu is the co-founder and director of Disability Consulting Ethiopia, an organization working in disability inclusion. He is a disability justice advocate and a human rights lawyer with over 16 years of experience as a consultant, educator, and a researcher. He has worked extensively across Africa, among others, serving as the regional director for the African Disability Alliance. Then we have Atif Sheikh. Atif is the executive director of STEP. STEP is Special Talent Exchange program, a very well-known cross-disability organization of persons with disabilities in Pakistan. He is also the director of Center for Research and Inclusive Development, a research associate at the Harvard Law School project, a disability project, and country representative for G3 ICT, Smart Cities for All. And we have Kevin Kelly. Kevin is the head of policy, partnership, and external affairs, and the second vice president of the European Blind Union. Kevin plays a central role at the Wayfinding Centre Ireland, an innovative, inclusive transport and mobility center, advancing accessibility through training, co-design, and stakeholders collaboration. So really welcome to all of you. If we can go to the next slide. And before I go to our first panelist, I would like to remind the audience that you can post your questions in the Q&A anytime. So coming to you, Meenakshi, with the first question. I'd like you to tell us what are the main gaps in access to services for persons with disabilities living in cities? And what are those key recommendations to improve access?
Yeah, thanks, Shivani, and thank you all for this opportunity to contribute to this very important discussion where urban cities are growing in terms of in its extent in geographic area and as far as population is concerned. So we all know that there is huge migration to urban areas and it's increasing constantly. And it is expanding by around 220,000 people migrating to urban areas every day. That's kind of one of the global statistics that we could find, which means the city has to be responding to the needs. And migration happens for various reasons, because the rural areas are shrinking due to climate changes and the lack of work and employment in the local communities, and also services for the most marginalized, which includes persons with disabilities. But what we see in urban areas is inequity in ensuring basic services between the urban wealth quintiles within the urban setup and their intersectional identities, including people with disabilities. These services includes transportation, we say accessible transportation, housing settlement, health, water, sanitation, disaster management, and risk reduction, because it's also a natural fallout of this migration and overpopulation and lack of services. And then this also exacerbates the internal displacements. The smart cities, the mushrooming of smart cities is also causing internal displacements. Then there is lack of systems to address the requirements of the rapidly increasing population and the expanding cities. And whatever already exists has been, we all know that is poorly managed. And lack of adequate budget allocations to effectively address the changes that's happening. And lack of data on the barriers in service delivery and the need assessment among diverse population. And the existing data doesn't provide relevant information for effective planning and services. This is what we know. But what we do not know or often misses our lens is the inequity from the lens of person with disability. Be it urban transport, urban health, public sanitation, urban housing, or specific services such as rehabilitation, support services, and other services. Across all these spaces, persons with disabilities have been experiencing difficulties in accessing them and using them effectively on an equal basis with others. So when we say difficulties from the lens of people with disabilities across income groups, because of migration, because of resettlement, and because of growing urban areas and sporadic development of these smart cities, we all know about infrastructural inaccessibility and also the inaccessibility of general services like health facilities, education, water, sanitation in terms of its accessibility. When we say transportation, the latest development, huge development happens. For example, in India, Vande Bharat is seen to be one of the massively connecting services, which is recently evolving, connecting various cities, and also the smart cities misses most often the universal design. And accessibility has become an afterthought constantly and consistently. But what we also, this we recognize as a sector, as a community, as different stakeholders recognize these gaps. But what we don't recognize is the missing link between availability and affordability of support services, which is mostly borne by the family, in turn increasing their income inequalities. And if the families cannot afford, it leaves behind persons with disabilities institutionalized within their homes, and often because of migration, it is intense. The institutionalization within their homes is intense. On an average, families spend at least 20 to 60% more for equal participation compared to families without a person with disability. This is part of our study. You can go through it on our website. And also, this is when families can afford. But there are many things, services which families cannot afford, and there are no services existing. For example, we do not have adequate government services for tactile interpreters, sign interpreters, and there is no personal assistance services available for people to use and access for most of us experiencing high restriction to participate. A holistic approach involves ensuring accessibility of infrastructure and support services such as care services, personal assistance services, assistive devices and equipment, and product level innovation. All of this is overlooked across services, innovations and investments. In all of these areas, it's been overlooked. So the impact has been lower levels of educational outcome, high instance of health-related issues, dropout, huge unpaid labor and indirect costs for families of persons with disabilities and people with disabilities themselves, lower standard of living, further marginalizing people with disabilities and isolating them, and lower levels of dignity, self-esteem, and left out in emergency and care situation most often. So some of the key recommendations from my side could include enhanced budget allocations across sector to address existing inequities, data gaps, research and innovation to address those gaps. Then training and sensitization of the government agencies for a holistic approach, including mandates on universal design across general services. Initiate specific policies and programs with adequate budget allocations, testing them across geographical diversities and across diversity of persons with disabilities to ensure services such as personal assistance, sign interpreters, tactile interpreters, peer support, and other forms of human support in close consultations with organizations of persons with disabilities. Nowhere in the framework of policy formulation or smart city development or city development, any development that enhances something to be called as a city doesn't include or involve actively persons with disabilities. So this has to be addressed. Data on barriers in service delivery and the needs assessment among the diverse population has to be planned because the existing doesn't allow such information. Then adequate social protection program in order to address the systemic marginalization experienced by people with disabilities and by addressing their income inequalities and service gaps. When we say service gaps, it includes rehabilitation services, it includes provision and access of assistive devices and technologies across all geographical locations and across diversity of population. All of this and healthcare services, which is often overlooked from the lens of people with disabilities. I think these are some of the recommendations that I could think of right now. And over to you, Shivani. I can pitch in more if necessary, but later. Thank you. Shivani? Hello?
Hi, Shivani, are you still there? I think we may have lost your audio.
Shivani, you're muted if you're talking. And
May I say, while we're waiting for Shivani, thank you for your input on the response there. I think you highlighted some really key points on the areas that are really important for improving access. I think they're definitely things we need to continue to build on.
Thank you.
Sophie, if you'd like to go to the next slide, and I can continue while we wait for Shivani to rejoin. So our next question is to Dagna Chu. So the question we wanted to pose to you was, what are some of the gaps in the policy frameworks in different countries for making basic services inclusive? And what are some of the recommendations? And if you can share an example from your work of what you may recommend.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, if you'd like to turn on your camera, that'd be also great.
Yes, I've been trying to do.
If not, don't worry.
You can't start your video because the host has stopped it. Can you check? Yeah, all right.
Okay, you can go ahead. We can hear you nice and clear. Oh, we can see it too. That's great.
Very good. Thank you very much for this invitation, and my appreciation to the previous presenter, as well as all the panelists, as well as the organizers of the important session. And the thematic area that we're covering also is something that, you know, is emerging in today's, especially academic and in the world of disability rights advocacy. But it's also, we need to keep in mind that it's also a novel topic, an area that still needs to be addressed quite extensively, because in the interest of everybody, not just persons with disabilities. I just wanted to add that I'm also a person with disability myself. So I come from not only an expertise point of view, I'm a lawyer by profession, but also a lived experience point of view as well. I'm born and raised in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I'm talking to you from Pretoria, South Africa now, where I arrived a couple of days ago for research purposes. So to answer your question, what are some of the gaps in the policy frameworks in different countries for making basic services inclusive? And what are the recommendations that you may share? I think in terms of talking of gaps in, I would say, inclusive policy frameworks, one should look into the compelling imperatives, the three compelling imperatives that make disability inclusion, or should make disability inclusion, a macro instead of a micro agenda. And our policymakers would understand us if we present our case with evidence the way I'm just about to present it, instead of saying that, you know, we're talking about 1 billion persons with disabilities, 15% of the country's population, and therefore this should be done, that should be done, kind of thing, without having presented concrete evidence, because policymakers listen to you only when you come with evidence. If ever they listen to evidence. So I have, based on my research, I'm currently working on doctoral research focused on disability-based violence for the past several years. So my readings have condensed the compelling evidence-based imperatives of inclusion into 3. You know, you don't have to go and look for 12 reasons why inclusive policies are mandatory. You can condense them into these three. The first one is what I call the economic imperative. I will explain that in a little bit and briefly in the interest of time. The second one is what I call the moral imperative. And the third one is what I call the legal imperatives, which would also enable me talk about the legal frameworks, the policy and legal frameworks that is also included in your question at last. So what do we mean by the economic imperatives of inclusion? So that there is ample evidence, not sufficient, but quite ample evidence indicating that the exclusion of persons with disabilities from services and the market, the economy, employment, etc., costs countries some 3 to 7% of their national GDPs. So there's this research produced by the International Labour Organization that focused on both low and middle income countries, some countries from Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. I can name the countries: China, Thailand, Vietnam, Ethiopia, Malawi, Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. This research shows that the exclusion of persons with disabilities from the workforce and also the exclusion of disability from our service sector and not having accessible services costs a nation some 3 to 7% of their GDP. Now, for anybody that comes from the background of economic studies, you would know that this is a significant number. 3% of GDP in itself, in its own, is a significant number, let alone 7%. And that is researched, that's evidence-based, and that's how our policymakers would understand how severe and impactful the impact of exclusion of persons with disabilities could be on the economy itself. So what does that mean? That means significant number of persons with disabilities are forced to be outside the labor force, outside accessibility, and therefore we have a society that's not prepared enough for any events of disability, if and when anybody happens to experience, including officials themselves, the people empowered themselves happen to experience disabilities, because that is a human experience, then they would find out after the fact that this is a society that's not, that they should have prepared for, they should have done better for. So the economic imperative can be briefly explained that way. And there are gaps in this regard to address the question in your slide. There are insurmountable, apparently seemingly insurmountable gaps in this regard when it comes to inclusive policies, because mainly persons with disabilities themselves are not the main players. They are spectators. They might happen to be invited to policy discourses, but the chances that they speak up and what they say would be captured are in most cases very limited. So that eventually reflects in this kind of gap that I just mentioned, where you don't have persons with disabilities in your workforce, in your economy to such an extent. Secondly, the second imperative, and I'll be very brief in the interest of time, the second imperative for inclusion is what I call the moral imperative, meaning that that understanding that disability is a lived experience for all, for someone like me, for somebody with disability, a polio survivor. It is a lived experience, of course. For the billion people around the world, it's a lived experience, but it's also a possibility for all. It is that aspect that our policymakers and our society happens to not take off. It's a reality for some, but a possibility for all. If one understands that disability is a possibility for all, then our actions would also be framed accordingly, because this is something that we all will experience at some day, at some point, because we are all human beings. As long as human beings exist, disability at some point would exist. It's a common denominator, whether you talk about the youth, women, children, the elderly. One common denominator among others that they have is that disability can be a common experience. Yes, I'll sum up, Shivita. This will be my third and last point. The other imperative, of course, speaking of the moral imperative, one other concept that we need to always keep in mind is the concept of ableism. The very genesis, the root cause of disability-based discrimination. Ableism meaning, if you just Google it, if you Google that word, and almost all of you in this panel are familiar with this concept, which has far-reaching ramifications on how policies are implemented and also even designed from the very beginning. It is a societal system that places value. Ableism is a societal system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on socially constructed ideas of normalcy, intelligence, excellence, and productivity. And this form of systemic oppression, it's a systemic oppression, leads to people in society determining who is valuable and worthy based on the person's appearance and or their ability to satisfactorily produce, excel, behave, etc. So the understanding of the concept of ableism is important. Finally is the legal imperative. I'm almost done. When it comes to the legal imperative, we have a number of legal frameworks. We have the CRPD, as you all know, and as of last year, we have the Africa Disability Protocol, which is similar to the CRPD, but with context-specific components for the continent of Africa and for the nations of Africa. And also, it's important to differentiate between the concepts of accessibility, reasonable accommodation, and universal design. Accessibility being something ingrained in the system, reasonable accommodation being something that is done on a case-by-case basis, and in universal design, UD being, of course, a major concept of architecture in that it makes our society and services accessible and as well as accommodative of all. So in terms of recommendations, understanding and also making sure that these conceptualizations are ingrained in our policy frameworks and legal frameworks, and ensuring that persons with disabilities participate from the get-go, from the very beginning up until the designing and also monitoring and evaluation stage of such policies will enable the policies to be effective. And in the question and answer session, I'll come back to some points that I might have not addressed. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dagnachu. In the interest of time, I'm just going to come straight to the next question. We're running a little low on time, so if we can try and keep the answers as concise as possible. Atif, now I'll just welcome a question to you. So can you elaborate on the ways of co-designing and co-creating basic services with organizations of persons with disabilities? And what are some good practice models for genuinely co-designing and co-producing services with people with disabilities, ensuring their perspectives are central from conception to ongoing operation? And the floor is to you, Atif.
Thank you very much. Hi. First of all, thank you very much for organizing this very timely discussion. Actually, the word technology, accessibility, and the transformative technologies overall, they're really important, critically important to ensure that cities are accessible for everyone, not only for people with disabilities, but every single person living in these communities. And we have to make sure that all the systems, all the ecosystem in society, including health, transportation, education, livelihood, all entertainment, whatever is existing for the people, it should be for everyone, not for the few people. And why there's a question that why we haven't addressed accessibility so far. It's been like many decades we have been working on the disability rights, but still we are fighting for an accessible environment because the discriminatory services or discrimination among people based on their disabilities is still very common practice in most of the developing countries. So when we are talking about the inclusive cities, the accessibility must be understood as a holistic approach. It should be part of all the ecosystems. It should be part of the policy, part of the implementation, part of the practices, and part of our academics. So far, like what we have seen, we have experienced. Let me give you one line about my introduction and of my organization's work. I'm representing an organization run by people with disabilities, STEP. For last 27 years, this organization is working very closely with government to influence the policy making. We have been working with the corporate sector, large corporate organizations, to make their doors open for people with disabilities so that they can be part of their human capital. We have been working with international donors and the UN agencies so that their projects are disability inclusive. So through these whole experiences, we have been engaging organizations of people with disabilities all over the country. So far, like 70 plus organizations run by people with disabilities have been established, cloned, or they have been working with us. So this is how we build their capacity so that they can talk about their rights and they can understand the true sense of accessibility or inclusive society for themselves. But still, like it's a dilemma. I would like to share that still people with disabilities in most of the developing countries, including Pakistan, they are not coming out of the charity mindset. And that's the biggest reason that they are not prepared to have accessible environment around themselves, because they are still thinking that they need help, they need charity, they are dependent on their family members or the society. So we are struggling very hard to build their capacity to understand their rights and to make sure that they should talk about accessible environment as their rights, not an option. So this is a major reason, like we have seen that accessibility is not visible very clearly so far. And accessibility in terms of communication and mobility, both should be integral part of all the organizations, all the services being provided in the society. Very, very common example of the air travel. Still, we think that the most of the airports are fully accessible and airlines are accommodating military users and the person with visual impairment or person with hearing impairment. But still, their announcement, their lodging, boarding, and their systems have lots of gaps in terms of accessibility. So now I'm coming to answer this question that we can address these gaps if people with disabilities are prepared. So it needs a kind of a twin track approach of capacity building on accessibility of systems. First of all, we need to work with service providers to understand accessibility for all people with diversified disabilities living in a community. On the other hand, we have to work with organizations of persons with disabilities so that they are able to advise when any organization are entrusted to have accessibility, so they find resources, which we are lacking, obviously. So we need to have people with disabilities as source of information, the organization as a hub of knowledge on accessibility, so that they can advise whenever they are needed for about accessibility. I will share two examples. One the best example, one the worst example. In Pakistan, State Bank of Pakistan has advised all the commercial banks to be accessible. And they made accessibility ramps, they made ATMs accessible, they made all the services, but they were not actually accessible. The ramps were not according to the universal design. The ATMs were installed in a very high, mounted on some kind of high walls. So they were, and for sale, they were accessible, but they were not actually accessible for the real users because people with disabilities were not consulted at all while making these ramps. And some of the banks contacted us. This is an example of the worst thing, that they have made compliance, but these services were not according to the universal design or according to the standards of accessibility of that area. So the second part of this example, that they started contacted organizations of persons with disabilities, and where they have found people with disabilities, the ramps are much better. Services are far better and according to the needs of people with disabilities. But at the same time, we are facing a huge shortage that even organizations of persons with disabilities are not having that knowledge. And we can address this gap through introducing research on policies related to accessibility, on policies related to the rights of people with disabilities, on policies related to inclusion, making services inclusive for everyone. And at the same time, we need to have accessibility as a subject in academic institutions, because we were exploring in a recent study conducted by GDI Hub and University College London in Pakistan about the availability of assistive technology. We found that most of the organization doesn't understand the meaning of accessibility at all. And an Institute of Architects of Pakistan, they have one chapter on accessible infrastructure, but they don't teach it because they think it's not that important. They just exclude it while they are teaching the architectural designs. So we have to create that kind of demand in the academic sector. The accessibility needs to be studied in terms of technology, in terms of communication, in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of transportation and mobility. So these aspects of accessibility must be taught in academics, must be researched, and these researches can help policymakers to decide that accessibility is a core component of all the design of the city while they are designing urban planning or even in the rural areas. Secondly, we need to build capacity of organizations and persons with disabilities through these academic sources or through some guidelines and training modules so that they are available when they are needed by these corporate sector and the policymakers. So these are my points. If you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer. Thank you, Suhani.
Thank you very much, Atif. And I think we may run over time, so hopefully people can stay on the call, because I think we've had such a wide range of knowledge and things to be shared. So, Kevin, it'd be great to hear from you and from your experience at the Wayfinding Centre and all your previous experience, how you could give us some feedback on this question. So our question to you is, what proactive measures can service providers and local governments take to challenge and change attitudes among staff and the wider community, ensuring a more welcoming and inclusive environment for all?
Thank you very much, and delighted to be here representing Vision Ireland and the Wayfinding Centre, which is a unique global initiative. I just want to acknowledge my fellow panellists this morning for their contributions. It's been very interesting listening to the various contributions and the various research that has been done. Being the fourth and final speaker, I'll try to be as concise as possible in the interests of time. The Wayfinding Centre is world's first training and mobility centre. We have 5 core pillars of work that we deliver in the centre, which is based in the capital of the Republic of Ireland, Dublin, quite close to the city centre. The first area of work is around providing training to people with disabilities to allow them to become more comfortable and familiar using all modes of public transport. How do we do that, you might ask? We have a number of modules, 7 in total in the centre, with a fully functioning streetscape. So our modules replicate the vehicles that are used out in the streets. So we have a controlled, calm environment for people to become more familiar and comfortable using all modes of public transport. The second pillar is around providing disability equality and awareness training to transport operators and their management teams, as well as local authorities and their staff, which is very important. The third and fourth pillars are around education, so educating people who are working in transport and in the built environment around access needs and how to support people with reduced mobility as they go about their daily work, whether they are designing new streetscapes or projects along the way. Sorry, Jaws just interrupted, which is my screen reader. And the fifth pillar is around the need for a national standard for the built environment, which we don't have in the Republic of Ireland. We have a series of guidelines, which means that designers in each local authority interpret the guidelines differently. Therefore, we end up with different designs. So we don't really have a universal design approach. The Wayfinding Centre is still very much in its infancy. We've only been operational for the last 15 months, but I think going back to your question that I was posed, how do we do about it? I think the most powerful thing that local authorities and government can do when they come to planning cities and services is to meaningfully engage with people with disabilities or reduced mobility. And all of the work and activities that we do in the Wayfinding Centre and have done over the last year or so are being driven and directed by people with disabilities, a broad range of disabilities. It's a pan-disability centre, so all of our training sessions are co-delivered and co-designed by people with disabilities, which makes it very impactful and powerful. We do also have we have also engaged with a number of bodies, state agencies. For example, we are engaging with the National Transport Authority in Ireland to run consultations on new proposed designs for island bus stops, something again which is very topical. So we're bringing all of the various stakeholders together in the Wayfinding Centre and to allow people with disabilities to have their voice heard and to shape and direct designs, and hopefully that will result in better outcomes and a more accessible design for our cities right across the Republic of Ireland. And I've just been indicated that we need to wrap, so I'll conclude my remarks at that for the moment. I'm happy to take any questions as part of the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you everyone for staying on. We are a little ahead of time. Please, if you can share your questions with us, we can perhaps share our email ID. Sophie, is it possible to share our contact ID? And if there are specific questions to the panelists, we can definitely reach out to them and seek those answers and revert to you. And we would just like to end by thanking all the panelists who brought in such rich discussions and knowledge to the table. And I would like to thank the GDI Hub team and the captioner for their support. And please join us for our next webinar, which is going to be the last of the IncluCITY webinar series. It's going to be on climate resilience and innovation for inclusive cities. It's going to be on July 23rd at the same time, which is 10 a.m. British Standard Time. You can use the QR code to register, or just watch out our LinkedIn post for the announcements closer to the date. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.